Oh, okay. We're gonna let people get in and get situated. We will also give our other panelists another minute to come in. Candace, feel free to share the slides as soon as you're good. Welcome. My name is Antoinette. My pronouns are they and them. And this is the second installment of Addressing Gender-Based Violence. We were really excited to have conversations across our association, not just with women and femmes within the UU Women's Federation, but also across our association to extend to gender expansive folks and the conversation expanding to men. And so we're really excited to have with us today Reverend Michael Crumpler and Reverend Daniel Lawler. And so let's see, there are some slides. Thank you all for being patient with us as we get settled. I'm going to feel free, if you're comfortable, with dropping your name and your pronouns and your locations into the chat so that we can welcome you. I won't drop mine in the chat, but I'll give an example. As I said, my name is Antoinette. My pronouns are they, them. I live on the Tongva Chumash land of so-called Los Angeles. And I will let Candace introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Candace. I am currently located in Atlanta, Georgia, wrestling around on Zoom trying to get my slides to work. Thanks everybody so much for joining us. From wherever you're coming from, we have an amazing conversation, and I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say. Yeah, so just give me 1 second. I'm in my settings trying to grant access or something to share my screen, which I've never had to do before, but 1 second.
Candace, that should work. Try it now. If you have a chalice with you and would like to light it, I'll let you know that we'll do a short opening reading and you can light your chalice. I have one. If for some reason Candace can't get her screen to work, I can probably
Yeah,
screen.
and do
I
you
can
mind?
do it.
Yes.
No, I don't mind. Can you message me the link,
Yes.
Antoinette?
Sure.
Either one of you,
Thank
actually.
you all for all of the patience. We get situated.
Okay, just 1 second. To change identities.
It's also nice because
Okay.
more people coming into the Zoom room.
Okay, 1 second. We're almost there. We're almost there, everybody. Ta-da!
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So as usual, we'll have a chalice lighting. We'll do some introductions of our guest. We will ask questions of our guest. We'll do announcements and some closing words. And so this is a great time to have your chalice ready if you are. These words are our faith to face our challenges, with love to cast out fear, with hope to trust tomorrow. We accept this day as the gift it is, a reason for rejoicing. I want to say that we as Unitarian Universalists, and specifically the Women's Federation, hold everyone in the conflicts around the world in our hearts. And we know that even though this is a day of rejoicing for all of us in the lives that we are able to live, that we spread joy and care to those in conflicts around the world. And so I'm going to move out of the way a little bit, and I'm going to let Reverend Michael Crumpler and Reverend Daniel Lawler to introduce themselves. We put their bios out during all of this, but I think it's much more interesting for them to share how they manifest their work in the Unitarian Universalist world. So I'm just going to take the moment to spotlight both. And we're good to take down the slides.
Go for it, Dan.
Oh my goodness. I'm excited to be in this space with all of you tonight. I'm excited to be in this space with Reverend Michael. Same panel. Feels good. I really, but genuinely just appreciate this opportunity. I think the work that the Women's Federation is doing is amazing. The call, the witness of this panel series, like it was a powerful invitation to do some deep reflection and recall some commitments I had made in seminary. And now it's like, all right, like how is that turning out? How can we lean into that more? So I just want to thank you for creating this space and this ministry. I'm just humbled and honored to be here. I serve our Unitarian Universalist congregation of the Hudson Valley in Croton-on-Hudson on Metro North, if any of you know the New York area. I also serve as the co-director of Focus on the Development fundraising for Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth. And I am the past affiliate community minister at First Unitarian in Brooklyn, which still has a very big space in my heart. So I'm just humbled and grateful to be here. Reverend Michael, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you. New York's in the house. I am the Reverend Michael Crumpler. My pronouns are he, him. I am in the land of the Canarsie, Lenape, also known as Brooklyn. And I am the LGBTQ and Multicultural Programs Director at the UUA, and my pronouns are he and him. I am Black, light skin, bald, with thick glasses, a green cardigan, and a maroon shirt underneath with some bling. And it's great to be here. I too am honored to be asked. I was looking over the questions and I was like, woo, but I'm excited. I think this is a great conversation to have. I think that it is important for all voices, all folks to be, on the feminist spectrum. I love the work of the Women's Federation, and I've been working with the Women's Federation pretty much since I've been here in my role at the UUA. I joined staff at the UUA in 2017, and then in 2018, I began working with the UWF on a fund that you all offer. And what we did, which is going to be pretty pertinent to this conversation, is we took that fund and used it to really get serious about trans non-binary ministries in a specific way. And that fund has evolved into a full-time position at the UA around gender justice ministries. And if it weren't for that partnership and thinking around how to best use that money to expand the work around gender justice, that would not have happened. So I'm really grateful to be here and to recognize you all for that partnership and speak to what that has brought about.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's so exciting. So I'm going to add myself and Candace, and we're gonna get into it, right? Let's get into it. And so just a little bit of background. The UUWF believes that building relationships is the most effective way to create positive cultural change. This idea came out of the understanding that much of the violence against women starts with gender inequality, that disrespects women, and the disregard of women's bodily autonomy. When we see that disrespect as violence in different forms, such as physical, mental, and sexual abuse. We also know that we at UUWF have 4 priority issues, and they intertwine in various ways. And what we used to call stopping domestic violence, we've changed very explicitly to protecting women. This priority issue looks to keeping women safe. It's explicit towards cis and trans women, and it's not always as explicit to our commitment to include non-binary, genderqueer, gender non-conforming, or gender expansive people. We try as often to add it to our marketing and media, and this space today is part of that public question of who we include when we talk about us. How can we, as UUWF, be more inclusive in our actions and language and still stand firmly in prioritizing women as our focus? And the second part of that is, have you seen other women's organizations do this well or do this poorly?
No. Well, not well. I don't know. I know I'll speak, Daniel, since I threw you under the bus to open us up. But well, I mean, it's certainly. I know that this is new. This is, I think, new, a new way of thinking, a new way of being. I think that the trans and non-binary people have been around for generations, and the silencing and the invisibleness, if that's a word, invisibility of that community, even in queer spaces, is something that has been problematic for a long time. I mean, I don't have to tell those of you who identify same gender loving and women or femme on this call, that even the queer movement has been, mostly, power driven, isolated by cisgender gay male. And so in our communities, even in queer communities, women have been, those who identify as women and trans people have been, second tier, if you will. So I'm not familiar off the top of I think that everyone's striving to do it better. And a lot of, what we are, seeking to practice and uphold comes through evolution, comes through being in conversation, comes through being open, listening. I know, at least for myself, but even in, our work at the UUA, and, and I guess advocating for non-binary folks is something that is just very new, in including folks. And as folks are more and more comfortable with coming out and not being afraid to really speak about, the complexities of gender, of their own gender identity and experience.
And the question reminds me of I'm a graduate of Boston University School of Theology, and one of the courses that was not required but was encouraged was healthy pastoral responses to intimate partner violence, and that was a new name for the class because it was trying to, even in the academic community, like trying to discern like what is the most expansive language we can use to try to engage the reality of what's happening and create caring responses and resistance to it. So I just echo what Reverend Michael was saying, where I think a lot of institutions, progressive religious institutions, are trying to discern what language, and then even more than that, what practices can really be the most honest and engaging and really liberating for the work we're trying to do.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yes. So we understand that, like, that it's clear that violence against women and gender sensitive people is not a systematic issue. That we can't individually like fight it away on our own. So that makes the question, like, what are some ways that you have created structures in your ministry for the collective safety and security of everyone?
So yes, I mean, and I think it begins with expanding what the word violence means. I think that so often we have, you know, understood, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, abuse as a physical thing that goes on, that is violent, that is and it kind of silos it off. It has been siloed off in such a way as to, make it difficult to speak about, primarily because if it's happening to you, it's there's deep shame connected to it. And if it's happening to someone else, there's a sense of trust, that you feel like, well, I know about this thing. How do I do about it? How do I support it? So it's not been something very public to speak about. I will say that one of the projects that our first intern left with us um, is a video series around intimate partner violence that was spoke to the issue from a variety of non cis male identities that we have in our archives that yet to be promoted because of COVID and so forth. They went on, but we are in the process of getting that published and making it available. And so I think, and it's really good. It's really, really good. Um, but and our hope in creating that series was to normalize how we talk about intimate partner violence, to understand all the dynamics that go into it, and not just have it as like this corner issue that happens to people that are somewhat vulnerable or victimized, unlike any of the rest of us. I think that we all, in a variety of ways, are victims of violence. One of the reasons why I arrived 2 minutes after I was asked to be here was that I was in therapy, and and I've been with my therapist now, for about 6 years, by the time I've been here at the institution and had health insurance. Amen. But one of the things that constantly comes up is it in my own issue is the violence that I've experienced. And, for so long, I just, as many of us do, assume that the traumatic things that happen to us are our fault, that they are something that, and that when we overcome them, that too is our victory, and not attaching and naming them as violence is somehow a way to get away from them. And I think, well, what I try to do in my ministry and my work is to not necessarily normalize violence or normalize pain or anything like that, but really flatten it, so that we all understand that domestic violence or childhood sexual abuse or any number of harms that we experience are universal, and we have to not feel bad or wrong about the things that we experience, so that we can be liberated from them in community and care.
One of the things that I love the honesty and the intentionality in what is just shared. And for me, like, kind of in the hat of being in a congregational setting, and it's thinking about what are the structures we're creating that are the language of an open door, and Reverend Dr. Sharon Welch has this beautiful phrase where she talks about, like, freedom does not necessarily, the language of freedom does not necessarily lead to ethical action. So just because we talk about liberation, to your question, doesn't mean that we have the practices and habits integrated into our systems to actually make those words true to the reality of our practice. And I was looking at just some old research from that class on intimate partner violence, and one of the things that struck me was that it was like a study of 500 religious leaders from 1995 to 2010, and they found that most ministers have not visited a safe house and don't know by name any workers in a local shelter. And I think that speaks to the challenges of the temptation to get really busy in congregational life, where it's like there's so much happening in the inner life of a congregation that as structures we can get removed from actually real need and real heartache just in a few streets over, a few blocks over. And so I think, to me, the invitation of the question is like, from the congregational perspective, whether it's through our committee on ministries or through just like the pastoral sharing and caring team or things, what are the resources that the congregation has to know the reality that people in the congregation have experienced violence, like that members of our clergy have experienced violence, maybe experiencing violence, at any given Sunday. And we have to create a space where things are more open. I'm powerfully haunted by a story from my intern congregation where one member really told me, was like, one of my friends in this congregation was homeless and felt too ashamed to tell people until they came out on the other side of that journey and had found a home. And just sort of through a year, just did not tell anyone, was going through all this, hadn't told the minister, hadn't told other people in the group. And that's a different issue, but I think it's related to, are we creating environments where people can be authentic and honest about the aches in their lives? And if we are, we're creating a safer place. And if we're not, we really need to examine like what's going on in our culture that people feel they need to mask in order to be part of our communities. So that might have been a little rambly, but I think it just through our worship, through our ongoing education, through training for peers as colleagues, and also within the life of the congregation, what are the structures we can do to help make sure more of us know at least some resources and where to go if we don't know answers.
Thank you for that. I think that one of the reasons we wanted to invite men specifically was because for women, men are typically the people who are harming us. And that's not in every case. There's also statistically, for women of color, white women are sometimes that other part of the violence towards us. And so my question to you is, in the teaching of folks to be in relation with the intersections of women, how do you feel this is coming along in your congregations, in your ministries? Like this, how is this cultural change appearing in the spaces that you are in? I know it's heavy. This is like, this is the work of doing it, right? Yeah.
Well, the UUA is just like, I'll just speak candidly. In all my years, which are way more than I realize at times, I've not been surrounded by so many women, trans femme folks, and it's beautiful. Like, I grew up in a matriarch family, and and it just, not because the old trope of like fathers and Black families or anything like that. There just were like women that were born into my family, and I was raised by them. cousins, aunts, uncles, and surrounded by them. And in my professional life, that had not been the case. I mean, I'm a 12-year veteran. I've worked a lot of corporate jobs, and it was a struggle, moving from that matriarchal, environment to corporate slash military world where there's just a whole nother you know mindset around leadership, what leadership is, what it means to take orders, what it means to follow directions, and who then becomes your examples of leadership. And so when I started working here at the UUA, I want to say it's one of the first times in my lives where my supervisor and her supervisor were both Black women. And today I can say that, like, the people who I supervise 4 people right now, and they're all like, well, actually they're all like non-binary, them. And so it's so there is something in the culture, I know. And being a cis person, I'm very conscious of my voice. I'm very conscious of how I give orders, how I give direction, how I ask for things, how I show up in meetings, when I speak. I think that for me, it's about just being conscious. I mean, even my minister here in New York for a while until she went to another congregation was a woman. And so there's just, I think it begins in our relationships, whether they are work relationships, family relationships. But like, women have just always been bosses in my life, just boss. And I, part of it, I just, say blame it on my mama, because I just was just surrounded by women. And I don't know, I just strive to, move into spaces, number one, aware of my own privilege, and what happens as a parent, but also, moving with a queer ethic. I think that, being aware of how patriarchy and toxic masculinity and, white cishetness has impacted me, how it's harmed me, and how in most cases, oops, I guess it's 8 o'clock, my lights are trying to go off in the basement because I'm usually not here at this time. But how those kind of ways of being have not served me, and if they haven't served me, they're not really serving anyone, really, and they're even more harmful for folks who are moving in bodies that are different than mine.
It's so powerful. I resonate with strong women in my life. My grandmother is amazing, and she just was foundational. My mother is so strong, and my wife should be the president of the United States. But I'm really conscious in the collegial spaces I've been in. This is one anecdote, but just like when I was served just a summer as a hospital chaplain, automatically people assumed I was either a Catholic priest, a rabbi, or an imam. Like, I would just walk in as a white man with a beard. People just assume, oh, there's the religious leader. Like, even if I was walking with a chaplain who had been there for 20 years, who was like just on a different level of spiritual grounding, pediatric chaplain leader who had been in the hospital, it was just the default ghost in the mind of the clergy leader, this bearded white man. Like, and I'm really conscious in collegial spaces to try to use the default, like, oh, he's a religious leader, to disrupt like what people expect of that religious leader to say, who we elevate, how we elevate. And so much of it is trying to undo these ghosts, that to what you said, Reverend Michael, about just like these habits are unhealthy. I had a really almost disassociated spirituality for a long time that was just like so heady, that was so avoidant of emotion, that was so avoidant of sorrow, and just, you know, was like trying to live here and avoid engagement. And I didn't realize that. I thought it was as a 20-something-year-old man, I thought I was like really enlightened and progressive, and I was like really disconnected from the world around me, or the level of sharing going on in relationships or partnerships. And it was only through like deep therapy and like growth and community circles and like learning different examples of, you know, what could be a healthy model in the world to unpack and change that. And I see all the time, I don't know how to do this, but I think about teenage boys a lot, even in the kind of suburban Croton land, north of the city. And I get worried about these people who have been socialized as young male, who are angry, who drove by one of our local pride celebrations just shouting all these hateful slurs. And I'm just like, I'm curious to find a pathway to disrupt and engage and connect, because I know there are many harmful models that are spending a lot of time online trying to reinforce those unhealthy, disconnecting habits that young men are hearing. And I don't know how to yet engage the platforms to show up in enough spaces, but I'm just like, relationships, what can we do to keep just the teenagers in our congregations, give them leadership roles, help them grow in this space, let them know they're not alone, like love them. I remember even in a UU congregation, one of our teenagers was nervous to come out despite all our leadership, all these examples, because of the messages of like, I can't say this out loud publicly, you know? So just because we have, to Dr. Welch's point, just because the statement is there, just because the flag is there, doesn't mean that they feel that love, that they know they're going to be loved. And I feel like that the constant showing up in presence and unpacking and creating safe spaces of growth, like growth is good, it's okay. Howard Thurman said, like, we can never return to innocence, but we can move forward with integrity. We can never return to innocence, but we can move forward with integrity. And that's like an anchor point I try to hold on to.
Yeah, I mean, something you said there made me think about like just what it means to be queer. And I know that is a word that, you know, the previous generation finds discomfort with. I get the emails all the time, but, you know, but I think, I don't know a lot. I don't know no straight people, except for Daniel. I just don't know a lot of, I just am not. So my partner and I was invited to a party last Sunday, a week ago Sunday. And, you know, a friend of his from school, and it was in the neighborhood. And I went there and it was like mostly straight white couples. And I'm up in there. And it was just a lot. And I just was so uncomfortable. I had a good time, but I had a hard time figuring out, like, you know, like how my phrases were going to be and what my, you know, small talk was going to be like. And it was a struggle. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm around too many queer people, which is not a thing. Like, I think that the more we are unapologetic about the ways that we are queer, even if we're not, you know, same gender loving, I think that the things that we like, the food, you know, the shows that we watch and the clothes that we wear and the colors, you know, that we express ourselves with, I think that is a way in which we can, you know, project out of these norms, you know. I can watch a football game, you know, as well as the rest of them, and baseball and basketball, but, you know, like I love Beyonce, and saying that out loud as a male presenting person is so important. The books that we read and the way that we move our bodies and our hands sometimes can be so restrictive. It's also learned. It's all very, very, very constructed, right? Mm-hmm. We're not born with a DNA that says, be square or be masculine. These things are learned, and I think that we have to unlearn how these cultural norms have impacted us, and learn how to dismantle them in the smallest of ways. We all, I think, have a pretty good, on this call and even in our faith, I think we have a pretty good lens, a pretty good analysis of gender. I mean, what we have 2 non-male UUA presidents in a row right now. And so we just have to then, unlearn all the ways in which, cis heteropatriarchy has harmed us, and not just say it, but begin to act differently. The last thing I'll say is that, like, when my friends figure out that I'm a minister, because it's not anything that I lead with, lately folks have been asking me to pray at meals, and I'm just kind of like, I don't want to be that person that's praying at meals. I also don't want to be that person that has to rip out a sacred text in order to in order to prove that I know something. I think that there are all kinds of ways that we, in the smallest of ways, can disrupt what people view as authority, what people view as beautiful, what people view as quote unquote normal for cis presenting folks, and what we dismiss away as emotional or soft.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that was an amazing, powerful conversation just now, especially about queerness, because as someone who says that they're queer, even though I'm not a same-sex loving person, I think queerness is like a way of living. Mm-hmm. It's about disrupting what is heteronormative. I think mm-hmm. that's really what an embodiment of queerness is about. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for saying that, because that was just so affirming. Because yes, and also I want to also add to a little bit of what you were saying, Daniel, about making the young people in your congregations feel welcome, like they can be their authentic selves. And it goes farther beyond just having role models and saying those things. But I really wanted to know, how have you been seeing social media and creative outlets being a tool that's actually advancing positive cultural shifts around gender? Because, I think that arts and creativity and mm-hmm. TikToks have really been powerful for a millennial kind of generation to really be okay, everything is not heteronormative. There's different type of representations and different ways of moving through the world that I really think social media plays a lot of part in, but it has ups and downs. But, I think that's one of the better sides of social media.
I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you naming that. I think about just some of the youth in our congregation who just, even make TikToks about the chalice, oh, can I take a photo of the candles, and just the pure joy that comes from this creativity. And even just, we're going to be doing a panel with Reverend Lane Cobb, who's amazing at the Mohegan Lake congregation, and we're just doing a question box where the coming of age class can ask ask the ministers anything, and and they joke about all different kinds of things, but it was one of the questions is what do you think about, how often do you think about the Roman Empire or something? But it's just they're just in the Gen Z, so we were joking oh, that could be one of the questions we do as a plant, but I love the music. I know of few of one of our students in particular is really involved in the drama program at their school, and it gives him so much life, so much mm-hmm. life, so much. So I just want you to meet him and hear him talk about how much joy comes from the drama program. Thank you to all the drama teachers across America who are doing and I think that's sort of the counter to the pessimism and fear of mm-hmm. What's happening? There's also so much beauty and creativity that's going on, and I appreciate that reminder to hold the tension. It's like it's a tool, and the tool can do beautiful things or harmful ones, but like what is a tool being used to do?
I mean, I think that social media is amazing. And I mean, I would say that one of the reasons why there's such a strong backlash to, you know, gender, queer gender expression is because of the visibility that social media has provided. However, without an analysis, I think that people see a thing and it's different and they react to it. And social media provides a platform for a crowd sourced, organized rage against something that is different. And it's really, really easy to gather people against something. I wish that more of us knew how to use those tools. Most of us are writers and preachers. When I say us, I mean ministers are writers and preachers and pastoral care providers, and none of that happens well on social media. None of that happens well publicly. I mean, yeah, there are TED Talks and other and podcasts and other platforms, but in the way in which reels and stories and TikToks happen, we haven't done the best job at really attaching meaning. And most of the times when we do, when you see it, it is reacting to the attacks on the right. Yes. or by conservatives. So that then before we even can begin to explain something or analyze something, you're already in an argument. And so I think for many of us, we could serve ourselves better by using these tools to alongside of what we're seeing, because you go through TikTok and you see all kinds of queer stuff, a lot of disruptive stuff, but the attacks are so vicious and so organized and so leveraged, resource wise that sometimes it's not easy to respond to them in a way that makes it effective.
I really appreciate you. I feel like that is my wife is always like, figure this out, like, figure out the TikTok, like do it, like, and there's such a need. I mean, I want to give a shout out to Kari Gottfried, who I think does really good. You use social media, like at Terry Universalist on Instagram, and I feel like it's like, that's a growing edge that I think if we can do more, just to your point, just storytelling, like what is Unitarian Universal? What are you in love with? Like what brings joy and inspiration in our religious movement? Like, and just find a fun, engaging way to do that. Because, I found Unitarian Universalism sort of by happenstance, like, and it was a congregation really close to where I was living at one point. Like I walked down the street and there was this little quirky church, and it changed my life, Bell Street Chapel. But like so many people are looking online, and if we're not there, they can't find us.
Yeah, there's a collective of ministers, real quick, that have been trending, Uplift Collective, kind of in response to trans issues. If I can find the handles, I'll send it to you. I'll put it in the chat. If not, I'll send it to Antoinette and Candace, and they can send it out to folks.
Yeah, that would be really great. And I kind of want to continue on this path a little bit in a with a more specific question on, I'm also a person that loves to be on TikTok. I don't post on TikTok, but I love to be on it. But one of the pieces of conversation that's coming out is not just uplifting queer voices and queer experiences, but the decentering of men. There's a lot of conversations on TikTok right now about weaponized incompetence and the way in which men are just mean to the women they love. And I guess my question is, like, in that noise as well, that I think that also makes it more difficult for us to build this connected, beloved community that we're working on. People ask us at Women's Federation, right? Like who gets to come and play? And I mean, I very explicitly say we are a not dudes club, but that's for the safety and the peace of the women that are here, and that's understandable.
Mhm.
In their spaces, like how are we having the conversations of who gets to play and build community together, when right now the noise is decentering men?
Mm. I'm all for it. I mean, like I ain't gotta go. I don't have to go to every cookout, and I respect that there are spaces that I'm not in, and I think that if we all can stand to have more sacred spaces that are affinity caucusy, and I think that the more spaces we have where people can be free and comfortable around themselves, I don't know. It just really frustrates me when people got to be everywhere, and when people take it personally when they're not asked to be somewhere, and not only not be there, but resource the spaces, particularly as this male, like resource the spaces that need to exist with that may not have the power and the resources that that I have. I think they're just so important to, number one, recognize where I'm not supposed to be, and then support the spaces and not seek their demise just because I don't get to be there.
Mhm.
I think that's really really important, and I think that in a culture where where we all want to be ecumenical, where we all want to be everybody's welcome, come one, come all. Oftentimes, you know, it's hard to be like no, at the door. um, Even in a Zoom, there's times when we have like particular Zooms where, where we have breakout rooms with caucuses, and sometimes we stumble with the language of no. This is not for you, or this is not for me, and being okay with that. Well, I mean, even lately, it's just like, do you have anything for like parents of trans kids or allies of trans people? That's church, not this Zoom. Like this space is for, and there's just not enough respect for space for spaces where that are just exclusive to the people that need it. You know, Everybody gets really, really anxious right now around certain things. And it's like, yes, we get that you are for it, but that doesn't mean that you got to be up in the conversation every time it's talked about. Let the people that need the most get the most right now. And again, see you at service on Sunday.
And one thing I'm thinking about, this is a Valerie Carr quote from See No Stranger, and it's the voices we spend the most time listening to in the world and inside our own minds shape the way we see, how we feel, and what we do. And so the voices we spend the most time listening to shape the way we see, how we feel, and what we do. And one of the things I don't actually know how to do this, but I think about not like maybe like the super online troll or just really angry, but like the person who might become that or get influenced into that. Like, how do we meet that person and be like, whoa, no, like, don't go that way. Come over here. Like, let's talk a little bit. And I don't know where they are. And that's not true because we're all everywhere, right? People are all everywhere. But like, that's something I'm curious about. Like, and I think I see it. I think about it more just because the context of for the last year and a month, like my ministry's been in the smaller town, like commuter town in the city. And it's just like you just see people like, it's a small town. So it's like, oh, like where are they going? Like, what are they hearing? What's influencing you? What's showing up? And so that's kind of an area of like disruption I'm curious about. Like, and part of it, it's like, we did we hosted a large production of the Laramie Project, which get really popular in town, and a lot of people beyond our congregations attended. And so I'm really conscious that like putting things in small ecosystems can have like big ripples. Like, and I think you're totally right, Reverend Michael, that also can produce backlashes, but like, you know, figuring out what is the healthy thing? What is the church to see you on Sunday? But like, what is health that we're building that can help some of the people who might be in danger of getting kind of atomized and like bitter, like into health, you know, and wholeness, and a gateway to wholeness and growth. Like,
yeah, I don't know how to do it either. I mean, I do that. I mean, I shouldn't say
But
that.
that's good though. That's good though. To be honest and say I'm not there yet, I don't know, or we're still working on it. So sorry.
I can't speak on that. You know, like that's, you know, to be able to say that is a powerful thing. But I mean, I think there are spaces, and I think that is why we have to, you know, be about community ministry in a variety of ways. Be in spaces, be in leagues, be in clubs, be in spaces where you're able to build trust. I don't know how much trust happens online. I don't know how much trust happens. You know, I don't even know. I mean, I have a friend who wrote an article about, essentially it was about gentrification in Brooklyn and how things are changing, and how, you know, basically like dragging white people in Brooklyn, like at the gym, that, you know, just, and it's, you know, it was, you know, in the, you know, in the Huffington Post, and it got all these comments, and people had all kinds of things to say, and then it kind of degenerated into calling him names, and it just got really, really dark, really, really fast. And I don't even know if half of those people read the article. People just react to a comment, and then all of a sudden more people are reading the comments than are reading the actual article. You know, he was all in his feelings about, like, you know, what he meant to write and what really happened. And I'm just like, none of that matters, except that like people don't really listen. And I think that when we can develop trust relationship, you know, that's when we can have those. And I'm not sure how that happens on social media much anymore. I think Zoom and pandemic and quarantine has opened up opportunities for people to become more technologically literate and connect without having to travel or without having to go somewhere or be at a particular physical space. So I think in that sense, there are more opportunities. I think more and more people are listening to audiobooks and podcasts and things like that. But if we could somehow build spaces of trust where we're kind of cross-pollinated with different identities and social locations, we can have those conversations.
Absolutely. And that definitely is like what a future that we want to collectively live in. Like, you know, when we think about like how we want to exist amongst each other, we want to exist in spaces where we all can be secure and safe, and like, you know, and for those values near to us. So it kind of sets us up for our last question before we open it up to everyone else. So what does this world of care look like for you? What are your visions of the future and care and love and abundance personally? Like, how do you feel?
I want like 50 loving UU congregations all across New York City. That's what 50 loving congregations of all different kinds of music and all different languages, and just like some of them run coffee shops and some of them are laundromat churches that like generate their money by running a laundromat. Like, and just all, I want like wild, beautiful variety of, and our faith to have like affordable housing with, you know, little forums on the first floor where like worship and music happen. I desperately, my wildest visions is just like, you know, Unitarian Universalism in 2050 looks like nothing we've ever seen before, but is like spaces of love that are like, and they don't have to be giant 1,000-person mega churches. They can be like a beautiful 80-person congregation that just like loves people in the neighborhood and helps out with flooding and visiting elders and like mentoring youth. Like, it's just, I think, now I don't know how to get to, but I want to name it and just put it in the world and like have more food forests. Like, it's just, I think the wild work is like sometimes just like getting to know people and like loving them and being present and like trying to own when we make a mistake and try to do better. Like, so that is my hundreds and dozens of like wild, all different kind of UU congregations all over the place, and that are just there and in love and caring for other people, like, and one another. Abundance, yes.
Yeah, I guess mine would just be similar. I think that in a lot of ways, Unitarian Universalism is moving towards, moving into our values of liberation and abolition and and climate responsibility and queerness and trans. I think that like what is happening in the world, the violence and the hate, and the just the nihilism and the wealth, is can have the opposite effect of bringing us together. There's not enough resources for us to thrive individually. We all, in order to win or at least survive, we're going to have to come together and reimagine what community looks like, reimagine what care looks like. Before it was like, let's do climate, let's do immigration, now let's do gay marriage, now let's do Black Lives Matter, now let's do, but like things are like kind of, it's like a a 20-car collision of things, and you can't just do one thing anymore. And it's not just like, well, we'll clean this up, we'll get focus on that mess when this mess is cleaned up. I think that we really, really need to lean into the exhaustion that we're all experiencing from the variety of caucasity that is happening, right now. It is just so, much. And I think that this is an awesome opportunity to say, hey, let's just rest together. Let's just sing together. Let's just eat together. Let's find, mutual aid to invest in and just heal and take care of people without just some, exhaustive analysis of what is going on and why it's going on and who it applies to and what word you used that was wrong and how you disrespected me. I think that all of those things are important, but I do think that now is the time for us to lean into one another, and with all the again, the mess that we're facing, and support one another in revolutionary ways.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. When I start taking questions from folks either in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you can ask questions of our panelist. You can either raise your hand, you can put your question in the chat, or you can actually say stack in the chat that also puts you in the queue. So I see that Leona has put a question in the chat, and I'll ask her question, and then I'll go to Barb and I'll let Barb ask her question. So Leona says, what do you do when you realize that a woman in your group is not able to be her full self? She has to hold back or seems to approve whatever her partner says. You see that she seems a bit afraid, even in public spaces. How do you approach that situation?
Well, I mean, to us,
Yeah.
well,
I think it
I
goes
mean,
back to the questions of what you're doing in your congregations to support folks in safe spaces.
yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I think it's important to be to engage couples in relationship. You know, I think every couple has its dynamic, and I think that I think it's we shouldn't assume that just because we see that happening, that we project onto that relationship what we feel. I think that's why it's so important for us to know ourselves, because it's real easy to transfer and interpret what we see. I mean, I think that just on its face, people have different personalities. People can be extroverted or introverted. They can be shy. Um, I've seen a lot of women just let the husband step in it and just be like, I am not responsible for what you say, or anything. So I think that the number one thing is always not check my assumptions about what's going on. That doesn't mean that we can turn a blind eye to what could be abusive, but I think, and then move in with relationship, ensure that, that anybody, particularly a woman who might be suffering abuse, has community, has people that they can trust, feel supported. It's also important, I think, in congregations, and hopefully your congregations do have discreetly placed numbers of contact and support in spaces where they can reach out, like in bathroom stalls and and spaces that and kind of like subtle spaces where they can find resources for support. And I think any institution should always be naming those resources of support subtly in their bulletin, and showing, so that if a person is being harmed and you're not aware of it, they can, find the resources subtly, on the DL, as the children would say, um, and but also just naming publicly without directly singling out someone, because you can put them in further harm if they think that if their abusive partner, thinks that, like, they're going to get some kind of help or support beyond them.
And one thing too, I love everything, and it's just sort of building a habit in the congregation of like naming Domestic Violence Awareness Month, or like sponsoring, like just normalizing within the life of the congregation, just, and some of it's subtle, just like that there are multiple opportunities for like an entry point into a conversation, so that someone knows, like, oh, like, I can make this choice, I can reach out to you, like that there are multiple gateways for that to happen. And just making them, it could be a little poster on the congregation bulletin board, like, but just something that someone encounters in different spaces, like, helps create entry points. Also make sure the congregation, like, that a team or somebody, there's a resource list of like referrals, like that, as you start to name things. That's what my professor, Dr. Nancy Newhouse, always was like, is like, when you start naming these things, make sure you have resources to support.
Mm-hmm.
When you publicly talk about this, people will come to you. So make sure that that our congregations, we do the work to have those resources ahead of time, so someone doesn't come in crisis, and that we're not able to provide those supports. That's an excellent question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna move out of the way and I'm gonna let Barb ask her question.
Well, maybe my question is more of a comment, but it certainly grows out of the previous question and other comments that have been made tonight. And that has to do with the issue in mind. I'm 75 years old. I've been involved with women's issues since the early 70s. I have never heard of a group of just men meeting to talk the way women do about what is gender-based violence. What can we do about it? What is our responsibility? How do we teach each other? And I'm wondering if in our denomination, at your churches and your communities, that might be more meaningful and effective than just one by one when you see these situations. And I love that you guys are here tonight, but it seems like men in these circles might be on a panel, right? But they're not in the group. We don't really want them in the group because we don't want to, maybe we don't feel safe. We don't want to be mansplained to. But why aren't they in their own groups? Why aren't there in every church a men's group? I mean, the men's groups in the churches I belong to had beer and ate barbecue and just bullshitted. They did not run a series on violence against anybody.
My response as a queer cisgender male, queer spaces by and large do tend to talk more about this than, I mean, I'm 100% with you. You know, I do think that you know, but I think that there is a different way in which queer men, you know, if it sounds like an oxymoron, but queer people, cis queer people, tend to approach these things. There is we're constantly, I recently founded a nonprofit of for Black queer people in recovery, and we, you know, from drugs and alcohol, and we spend a lot of social time together. And in those spaces, there is a lot of talk about, you know, I'm not saying that transphobia doesn't exist or misogyny doesn't exist in queer spaces, which I said earlier that it exists heavily, but I mean, and when I say queer, I mean not gay male. I mean, there is a way in which there is a queer ethic around how we treat one another, how we call out, you know, bigotry and racism and misogyny when we see it, transphobia, and those kinds of things. And so it's not a specific, I've not ever been a part of a specific group, but I do think that, you know, as Candace was naming, that there is a queer ethic that is evolving that could include such a conversation.
I really like your question. I really like your question. And it's making me think a lot. I feel like, in contrast to sort of that creative queer response, it's sort of, there's cis-het men, white cis-het men, socialized white cis-het men. There's this individualist, even in progressive, who's like, the individual, I'm gonna think about it. Like, I'm gonna, you know, like, and I have, you know, a lot of one-on-one male friendships. I'm often not in like a big group of men. And like some of that, like, you know, it's because I'm like, I don't want to be around. I don't want to be around.
I don't want to be there.
Like,
I
you know,
cannot be there.
And you know, and Yumi says, she's like, honey, like, who else is going to do it? I'm not going to do it. Like, you know, like how else can these spaces be disrupted if like you can go in, like, and I feel like that community space, like whatever this third space is between Sunday morning and like a one-on-one conversation, like it is something that could be developed in a way healthier way. And what's the organizing principle? I'm not I want to think more about what you said, Barb, because I think you're actually getting to something really powerful, which is there's this deep avoidance, or like, let's just keep it high, ha ha ha, you know, like, and I think about just different encounters. I was a public school teacher before I went into ministry, and just how energy would shift if it was like an all male faculty room, or if it was a mixed faculty room, or if it was a predominantly identifying as women faculty room. Like just offhand comments someone would say, and it's like, don't say that, you know, like, but just the assumption that people can say things like is just so ingrained. Like, I'm really intrigued on the vehicle that, like, whether it's in our congregation, just explicit, like we have allies for racial equity, maybe it's, you know, men to prevent domestic violence, men to disrupt intimate partner violence, whatever the framing. But I think unless the community creates accountability, and forces a gateway into different kind of conversations, that maybe an individual earnestly will be like, oh, I affirm that. But like, if you'll find out if you actually do it, if you're in a group of people, like.
And I too, I agree. I think that it's an amazing question, but I also think that, you know, the Me Too movement did also spark a lot of these conversations and spaces. I think that, you know, we think of domestic violence as physical, and, you know, a lot of the violence that Me Too was like workplace-based violence. But I do know that out of those conversations did come a lot of conversations that were, you know, cis male conversations around calling one another in, around how do we perpetuate violence in the workplace, sexual violence in the workplace. I think that we could do it more. I know that there was, you know, I know that at the UUA we held a lot of, you know, both around dismantling white supremacy and, you know, Me Too, you know, 2017, 2018, 2019. We did have some discussions around, you know, what is this like, you know, the way in which women are violated, you know, in a multitude of ways, and the way that, you know, power operates in you know, male female relationships, and oftentimes male male relationships or female female relationships. Like how does power operate? So I think that it did happen. I do fear that it was just like a, you know, a wave, and not necessarily something that was normalized the way that it could be.
Thank you. I'm going to, I see that Leona has a question in the chat and has your hand raised. Is it the same question? Did you want me to? Yes?
Yeah, pretty much. I just wanted to maybe put a little context into the question. I was recently at a gender studies workshop, and they actually said, they were quoting research that says that men are responsible, I think they said, for 98% of the violence, but I know it was over 90% of the violence in the world. And some of their understanding was looking at evolutionary issues and trying to make sense of why this phenomenal responsibility for violence, why does that fall on men? Why are men responsible for that? Why do men choose violence as a form of communication? And we know that if you look at lethality, men are far more violent than women in domestic violence situations. And many of the situations where there is domestic violence, there's also other kinds of violence of men on men, or violence of, you know, men shooting children, or, you know, those kinds of things. I mean, it's horrible to think about, and yet it is a profound reality in our lives. And I think it's a reality that women are not terribly effective at trying to change, because then it's, you know, kind of pointing a finger and saying, well, you guys, you know, you're the, you know, blah, 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 blame. That it's very difficult to, for women, you know, most of the men who are violent against women don't take women seriously anyway. And so to try to point that finger doesn't very often work really well. And it seems to me like it may be something that it would be crucial for men to really take on the authorship of what we will do about this and why we will do it. And so I am wondering, what is your response to that? The statistics are absolutely profound. And it's difficult, I think, for us to understand and not make excuses, if you see what I mean, and also not blame. Let me just say one other thing when I say that. I did write a book about this subject. It's called The Fog of Faith, Surviving My Impotent God. And in that book, I raised many theological questions about what violence against women brings up for women.
Mm.
And I think it's, you can get it on Amazon, but you can also get it on Audible. It's an audio book also. So it's a foundation about what trauma means in the life of I want to say believers. I don't mean necessarily Christian or atheist or whatever, but just what comes up in our meaning-making systems when violence touches our lives. And I think that's an equally important question for men, because I know that many of the men that are abusers of violence have also experienced violence. Many of the men that put down and demean women have been put down and demeaned also. Again, not as an excuse, but just an existential reality of the hugeness of this situation. So I guess I really want your input and understanding, and what ways do you find that you might take this on as a really profound issue in our culture today?
I'm just sitting with the heaviness of the reality that, I'm sure many of us on the call have read those statistics, but just hearing you name it out loud, I think just a lot of pain came up. So I just appreciate you naming that reality. I think I worry about this a lot, because I think as I worry about the growth of Unitarian Universalism, not because I necessarily want us to statistically be big, but because I think there is possibly something that in our vehicle of our style of faith and the culture we're trying to create that might be a gateway for people to develop at least a space to kind of develop a different kind of consciousness. We're not the only one. Different communities are doing good work in this, and I just I just think about how do we influence basketball coaches, and how do we influence just sports leaders, and how do we become more present in spaces that maybe we have not been before, that I haven't been before. I'm gonna have to learn how to do some different things than I have possibly, but or even if it's just we're gonna host an arts club. That's what I feel like in order to disrupt some of these these awful consciousness, these cruel attitudes. It's like we need to be proximate to people, and we need to be proximate to men and young men, or people who identify as men and young men, to create at least some spaces that can at least do some difference. Because even for our communities, as much as people gather from our worship services and experiences, there are a ton of men who are influencing all the people in our community who have really different ideologies and analysis all the time, from like just when they're going down the street to when they're shopping to like what a random security guard says to somebody at a mall. Like, you know, like it's like there are all these ideologists, say nothing of our political moment. Like, and I loved what Reverend Michael said about community ministry. And I think it's like to make the type of impact you're talking about, I think we need to find a way to show up where we maybe haven't in the ways, because without the relationship, I don't know how we can even begin to influence young men in different ways, in larger numbers.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that there's a way in which we're all complicit, even though the violence is at the hand of men. I think there's a way that we're all complicit. I think that again, which is why our gender norms, the way that we dress little boys, the toys that we give them early on versus the toys that we give girls. I think that you know, the sports boys play versus the ways that girls play. I think that it begins much earlier, and it takes a lot of discipline to not start those things, like to not buy little boys blue and little girls pink only. I think that it is so endemic to how we're all socialized, you know, and then, you know, it's and there's just a lot of peer pressure in parenting, and I'm not a parent, and so I just want to name that it is tough, you know. The things that we affirm, the things that we applaud. I think that, you know, that all of us are socialized into this girl boy binary that sets boys up to be more violent and to receive praise and affirmation and validation from that, and for girls to be less violent and to also receive validation and praise for that. And which is why I think it is so threatening, like trans non-binary identity, and it's so threatening because, and then this whole idea about how, you know, like, you know, women's sports and men play. I mean, it's all just so very intertwined, and that is why, like, for lack of a better metaphor, war is happening against, you know, transgender and non-binary people at a very early age, because this stuff starts, you know, long before, you know, adulthood. And we focused a lot in Unitarian Universalism around white supremacy as a function of animus and hate towards people of color. But white supremacy is not just a racialized analysis of power. You know, white supremacy is, you know, an indictment on, you know, heteropatriarchy. It's an indictment on capitalism. It's an indictment on, you know, climate. It's an indictment on a variety of things that lead to this violence. And while violence is certainly perpetuated by men, I think that we're all kind of complicit. You know, we all like chivalry and all of these like classical norms that we all romanticize, and, you know, the things that we watch, and it's all just so deep within us, and so it's so entrenched in us. And we've for so long dismissed single parenting as like a, you know, I don't know, as an honorable way to raise children, when honestly, like, like I learned a lot about gender and didn't pick up on a lot just because there were limited resources for me to go and play sports and have to clean and wash dishes and take, like, there were ways that subverted the ways that I view my gender and all, but those things are shamed and viewed as like, very, very like, and like unconventional, when there are ways that people were raised. So I think that it starts, with all of us. I think that and we have to be very mindful of the things that we promote and do and affirm and dismiss as male or female or good or bad or strong or weak. And I think talking about the violence now is a little bit like, talking about the cake after it comes out of the oven, when a lot of it has to do with the ingredients that you put in, and we have to really rethink these, I think these very, mundane, rudimentary things that we all do, and ask how that contributes to what comes out on the other side.
And this is like a weird rhyming, but when you're talking about the mundane things, like at U Ministry for Earth, one of the things we're trying to do is like the program teams created these full moon gatherings. It's like worship services on Zoom, there's action reflection circles, and it's like, and part of it is just trying to socialize like a different way to being. Our project with that is different, where it's more just normalizing like climate grief. Like it's like we're being, like there is a disaster unfolding around us, and let's be honest, and it's okay to be sad about that, and that doesn't mean we need to despair, but like let's create space to like be honest about this emotion. And it's hard. People don't want to talk about that because it can it can feel overwhelming, and like to even touch that, it's both desperately needed because people know it, but we're scared to say it. Like, but there's a resistance because I don't like, can we just do another action? I don't want to spend this hour talking about grief. And it's like, we can do that. We can still do action. We need to do that, but we also need to create space to process this. And I think there's a rhyming where it's like misogyny, like I have been brainwashed. We have all been brainwashed into these inherited awful structures that are literally the foundational institutions of the society we're in, like, which have so many ghosts walking around all over the place. Like, and I think it's almost painful, like to engage it, like starts to create pain and rethought, and people want to run away. But I think like whatever can help us break down. I remember huge arguments at they're doing really good work to process and get to their next stage. But when I was an intern at a congregation in Boston, there were huge arguments about a colonial statue they had in front of the congregation. And just like the work to re-narrate, like just because the statue has been here for 100 years doesn't mean it's healthy or that it's healing or that it's not like toxic to your soul to have this enslaver in front of your space of worship. Like, this is gross. Like, but it took so much to unpack that and to kind of see it a little differently. And I think it's related to, it's like these mundane monsters that are like monstrous parts of us that are all over.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to give you both another minute to say your last words, and then we'll do our announcements. We'll bring the slides back up and do announcements. But if you have any last thoughts, Daniel or Michael, for us to leave with, I would love to hear that.
Daniel.
Valerie Carr says, we got to find the seconds of solitude to get quiet enough. The seconds of solitude to get quiet enough. So I think to really disrupt this, it's like to go fast, we have to slow down. And I just want to thank you for this event. I hope there are like many more. I want to come to the next one and hear what happens. And just what a gift to be with all of you and Reverend Michael, I just want to keep talking with you, like for the rest.
Yes, thank you so much. You do phenomenal work, and you're doing great work. Not right up the road. Yeah, thank you so much, Candace and Antoinette, for being fierce and doing the thing. And this is just a powerful space. I think this space is the way. I always try to lead with joy. I think having fun and and getting people beyond the cerebral, thinking, and to find their fabulousness is just, the way to go. And then obviously love and care is super, super important. Care spaces are really, really important. I led a retreat where we didn't do a workshop. We ate, we shopped, we danced, we watched the movie, and then we had gratitude. And I think that we really, really need free spaces. And the more free spaces we have, the more we can, really, really push back against the systems that perpetuate the hostility that we all are carrying.
Thank you both so much for being with us this evening. We are so appreciative of the work that you do and the support you have for the UU Women's Federation. And in just a moment, I'll have Anne share her screen and we will talk about the last few events that are coming up. Oh, maybe not. We'll see. Let's see. If you've been with us before, you know that the Women's Federation is busy. We are having monthly events, community gatherings, our monthly reads, our upcoming panels this month. And if it doesn't work, maybe I can also share my screen and see if it will come up. Maybe. What I will do is I will start to drop some links in the chat. If you are not already a part of our online community, this is a link for our Mighty Networks, where we allow for community space for people to chat, updates on events that we're having and such like that. We also have our events page for upcoming events. Our next panel is October 28th. Sorry, October 26th is our next panel, and that will be women speaking on how we can work together to address gender-based violence. On the 19th, we have our upcoming community gathering, and that will be someone coming and talking to us about Zoom inclusion. So a little bit more about how we can be a community together. And November, I believe the date, since I'm not looking at it right now, is the 5th for our next monthly read. And so if all of that
I'm sorry, Antoinette, it will not let me share. It says my sharing is paused, but it won't let me unpause. So I don't know why that is, but sorry.
No worries. Let's see if I can do this. So can folks see that window?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So as we said, our next panel, I put the 28th, but I actually think the date is the 26th. It's the last Thursday of the month, which is our final panel for addressing gender-based violence. We'll have Reverend Kimberly Johnson, which is a member of our board. We'll have the Reverend Ashley Haran, who is the director with Side of Love, and the Reverend Latifa Green, Griffin, who is a minister based in Florida. And they'll all be talking mostly these same questions about addressing gender-based violence for women and gender expansive folks. Our community gathering is coming up on the 19th, and our November monthly reads is coming up on November 5th. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can join our online community. I dropped in the chat already our events page where you can register for upcoming events. What I did not add to this, which I should start talking about, and I hope people are pushing this out into their networks, is that we now have a monthly gathering for Black women seminarians. It's called Black Women of the Chalice, and it meets Thursdays and or Saturdays. And so you can also see in our events page when the next upcoming Black Women of the Chalice meetups are, and they are for Black women who are in seminary school on their UU path. So we're really excited about that. Our next book club read is not a book, but will be the Berry Street essay of the Reverend Cecilia Kingman. This was actually suggested by Reverend Kimberly at our last meetup. And so there is a link for that I can put in the chat, because I pulled it up so that I could put it in the chat. But we've started this process of also adding things that are not books so that it gives people a chance to get through the books and take a breather, right? It can be challenging. We all got busy lives. And so if you're interested in the book after November, December we'll be reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which I know folks have started, and this just gives you 2 months to think about getting to it so that in November you're able to join us and discuss the book coming up. And last are just some closing words. If you lit a chalice at the beginning, you're free to blow it out now. And these closing words are: we are one after all, you and I. Together we suffer, together we exist, and forever we will recreate each other. And so I am so grateful that Daniel and Michael are with us. Thank you, Candace, for always being my partner in crime, and to Anne, who's helping out also with Zoom stuff. UU Women's Federation is very grateful for all of you, and we hope that you have a lovely evening.
Yes, thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's an outstanding conversation. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
Aloha.